Basic Blueprint Reading for Welders. Machine Features Part 3. Gary Pace, PE, CWI, TexasWeldingEngineering.com. This is an entry-level blueprint reading book written for the first-year welding students. It's out of Oregon. If you just type in Open Oregon Blueprint Reading, and it should come up with any search engine, Google, Yandex, Bing, whatever you use, DuckDuckGo. Chapter 9 is the one we're going to cover this time. Here's the URL if you want to find it, openoregon.pressbooks.pub blueprint. But it's a pretty good book, and that's what we've been chipping our way through with all these modules. We're going to cover the terminology neck, pad, round, spline, spot face, and T-slot. So this is a neck. A neck would be where you take and you machine a narrow groove on a cylindrical part or object. So mostly this would be on a shaft. Let's say you needed some kind of groove on a shaft. You would machine it in. You would use a cutting tool and machine a groove into this shaft. A shaft is a spinning piece of metal that usually rests on some bearings and has a pump or a motor or some kind of other rotating element to it. So this would be like a pump and a motor. All our water gets to our houses and sprinklers and wherever, it has to be pumped. So there's giant motors with pumps. Well, all these electric motors and pumps have shafts on them, and the shafts are coupled together. And as a welder, you could reasonably be expected to cross paths with, a shaft, a pump, a motor, a casting, a lot of these types of industrial components. So that's why we're covering this, just to get a little bit of vocabulary into your system. So you can see on the right side, we've got the electric motor. I've circled in the middle one of the shafts. That would be the pump shaft. And then on the left side, we've got the pump. And of course, this isn't hooked up to piping or whatever and having the water pumped through it, but this would be a pump assembly. There's in the Houston area for oil, gas, sewage, water, everything. There's tens of thousands of pumps and motors going at any given moment. So not a bad idea to understand a little bit about this. This would be a pad. A pad is a slightly raised surface projecting out of the body of a part. The pad surface can be of any size or shape. Remember, bosses can only be round, so this would be a pad. Okay, so casting. I've talked about casting a little bit. This would be casting. Casting is a manufacturing process in which a liquid material is usually poured into a mold which contains a hollow cavity of the desired shape and then allowed to solidify. The solidified part is also known as a casting, which is ejected or broken out of the mold to complete the process. So basically they make a hollow part of a hollow area, and then they pour hot metal into it, and then the metal solidifies. It's like making ice cubes. It'd be like making those SpongeBob-looking ice cream bars that you'd see at the store or at the ice cream truck comes through. Well, they just pour ice cream in there, and it freezes super hard, and it gives it that weird shape. Or a Jell-O mold. You pour Jell-O into a weird shape, and the Jell-O retains that shape. We do the same thing with metal. That's how we get a lot of the shapes of metal in our lives, in our society, in industrial and mechanical and whatever types of uses. So it's called casting. So they take sand, they build a mold, and it's hollow, and they pour liquid metal in there, and then they break the sand off, and then you've got a solidified part like you would see in the lower right-hand corner of this slide. So this is called casting. Round. A small radius rounded on the outside corner formed between two surfaces. So basically you're just rounding the corner off of something. You're just knocking the edge off it. That's called a round. This is called a spline. It's a gear-like serrated surface on a shaft. It takes the place of a key when more torque strength is required. So remember we talked about keys, keyways, and all that stuff on a shaft? Here would be if you have too much torque for one key, you'd use a splined shaft. And the engineers figure all this out, but this is a splined shaft. Here would be a splined shaft with a coupling. You can see where the splined shaft will slide into the splined coupling. You might have seen something similar to this if you've ever played with Legos. Certain Legos have a splined shaft and they only fit into certain holes because you need them to hold a certain way. So that would be a spline. That would be another example of a splined shaft. So here would be some Lego examples of a splined shaft and a splined coupling. So you can just see where we've got these little cross pieces where you need a little more bite, where you need it to hold, where you need it so it doesn't slip inside the coupling. So this all goes out to big people world when we're building cars or pump shafts or whatever kind of mechanical devices. A lot of these things happen in Lego world, but also happen in big people world. But the principles are still the same. This would be a splined shaft and a splined coupling. This would be a spot face. You're going to see this on castings or forgings, and it's for a bolt head. They're usually about 1/16 of an inch deep. This is called a spot face. You'll see these on motors, engines, on your car if you ever tear one apart. It's called a spot face. And if you ever get into welding in a machine shop, you're probably going to see spot faces. You might be asked to weld a spot face up, or they're going to put one in. But that's called a spot face. This is a T-slot. Looks like a T. So any slot of dimensions to resemble a T, that is a T-slot. So we covered neck, pad, round, spline, spot face, and T-slot. And we talked about castings and pumps also.